Everyone expected us to burn a world. I was in the room when High Command decided what to do after the Empire crossed the last line, and I will tell you the truth that the history smoothed over. We had the fleet, we had the targets, we had the authorization, and we had every human reason to do it. And the hardest thing I have ever watched anyone do was the old admiral standing up in that room full of grief and rage and saying, "No. If we answer this the way they want us to, they've already won, and they'll have made us into them while we thought we were beating them." The response that made humanity feared across the galaxy was not the one anyone remembers. It was the opposite of the one anyone remembers, and I'm the one who has to tell you what it actually was. Let me set it down properly, because you have to understand the line and how it was crossed before the response makes any sense. I was a staff officer at Terran High Command, a aide, mid-level, the kind of officer who carries the right folder into the right room and keeps the coffee coming and is present, silent, for decisions far above their rank. It is not a glamorous posting. It is the posting of a person who sees how the great decisions actually get made, which is in tired rooms by frightened people under impossible pressure, and who learns that history is decided by a handful of exhausted humans in a moment, and then dressed up afterward to look inevitable. I had been at High Command for 6 years when the Empire crossed the line, and I had watched us fight them for most of that time, and I thought I understood what kind of war it was. I didn't, not until the line was crossed and the room had to decide, and I learned what the war had actually been about all along. The Empire was the Sceptre Dominion, and they were old and vast and very good at war, and I want to be clear that this was not a war humanity was winning. The histories now tell it as the inevitable rise of humanity, the underestimated newcomers who turned out to be the galaxy's deadliest, but that's the comfortable version told afterward. At the time, we were the smaller power, the younger power, fighting a defensive war against an empire that outweighed us, and we were holding barely, at great cost, but holding, in the way you hold against something bigger than you, which is to say we were surviving and not winning, and everyone at High Command knew it. The war had settled into a grim equilibrium. The Dominion couldn't break us quickly, and we couldn't push them back, and so it had become a long, bitter contest of attrition along a contested frontier, the kind of war that grinds for years and is decided not by brilliance, but by who can bear the cost longer. And the Dominion was losing patience. That was the thing that led to the line. An old empire fighting a long war it had expected to win quickly against an upstart. That is a dangerous, humiliated thing. And a humiliated power looks for a way to break the stalemate, to force a decision, to make the cost unbearable for the other side fast enough to end the war before its own people tire of it. The Dominion had been probing for our breaking point for 2 years, and they had concluded, correctly, that humanity's breaking point was not our fleets or our worlds. It was our civilians. We fought hard for our military positions, but we fought desperately for our people. And the Dominion had noticed, the way a predator notices, that the way to hurt humanity was not to kill our soldiers, but to threaten the ones we were protecting. I want you to understand what that war had already cost, because the cost is what loaded the gun in that room. 2 years of attrition is not an abstraction when you're the one filing the casualty reports, and that was part of my job. I saw the numbers before the admirals did, the daily ledger of a grinding war, the ships lost, and the world shelled, and the long, slow bleeding of a smaller power holding against a larger one. I had stopped being able to read the names. That's a thing that happens. You start reading the names of the dead, and at some point your mind closes a door, because you cannot carry that many, and after that they're just numbers, and you hate yourself a little for the relief of it. Everyone at High Command had that closed door by the 2nd year. We were tired in a way that goes past the body. We were a building full of people who had been losing friends for 2 years, and holding a line that didn't move and watching an empire that outweighed us probe patiently for the place where we'd finally crack. And I'll be honest about my own stake, because it matters for what I felt in the room later. I had family on the frontier, not on Sanctuary, but on one of the worlds the evacuees had come from, and I had spent 2 years not knowing, most weeks, whether they were alive, and I had filed casualty reports with a part of my mind always scanning for names I knew. So when I tell you what the room felt when Sanctuary was hit, understand that I felt it too, completely, in my own body. I was not an impartial observer of the rage. I was inside it. When the clarity came, they did it first, so now we can do anything. It came for me as much as anyone, and the relief of it, the terrible permission of it, was something I felt in my chest like a door blown open. I tell you this so you understand that what the old admiral did, he did against the unanimous want of every grieving, exhausted human in that building, mine included. He was not the voice of the room. He was one tired old man against the entire room, and the room was right to feel what it felt, and he stood up anyway. So they crossed the line, and I have to tell you exactly what the line was, because the title calls it humanity's final red line and makes it sound grand, and it was not grand. It was the most basic thing there is. There was a world called Sanctuary. The name is on the nose, I know, but it was named that for a reason. It was a refugee world, a planet behind our lines where we had gathered the civilians displaced by the war, the millions of people evacuated from the contested frontier, the children and the old and the wounded and the families who'd lost their homes to the fighting. It was not a military target. It had no strategic value. It was, by every law and custom of war that any civilization in the galaxy claimed to honor, off limits, a place of non-combatants, marked and known and understood by both sides to be outside the war. It was where we put the people we were trying to save. It was the physical embodiment of the thing humanity was actually fighting for, which was not territory or power, but the survival of our people. I'd seen Sanctuary once in the first year. I'd carried documents out there on a transport run, and so I knew it as a place and not just a name on a display, and that's part of why what came later landed the way it did. It was a hopeful place, in the way that refugee worlds sometimes are when the people running them are decent. We'd done it well. There were proper shelters and not just camps, schools running for the children, gardens going in, the beginnings of the ordinary life that displaced people build when you give them safety and a little time. I remembered the children most. There were so many children. A war makes orphans and separates families, and a refugee world fills up with children, and Sanctuary was loud with them. Kids who'd lost their homes playing in the dust between the shelters the way children play anywhere, because children will find their way back to play in almost any conditions if the adults manage to keep the actual war away from them. That was the whole promise of Sanctuary, the thing it existed to do, keep the actual war away from them. Let the children play. We had told those families that this world was safe. We had promised them. Both sides knew it was a civilian world. That was the entire point of designating it. The safety was supposed to be guaranteed by the one rule that even enemies in our region of the galaxy claimed to keep, which was that you do not make war on the children behind the lines. So when I tell you the Dominion attacked Sanctuary, I need you to understand that they did not just kill civilians. They broke a promise we had made, that humanity had made to its own most helpless people, in good faith, relying on a rule everyone claimed to honor. They turned the one place we'd built to keep children safe into the place where the war found them anyway. And they did it on purpose as a message, knowing exactly what it would do to us. And the Dominion attacked it. Not by accident. Not as collateral damage. Deliberately as strategy, a calculated strike on a known civilian refuge, designed to do exactly what it did, which was to confront humanity with a choice. They hit Sanctuary and they did it openly, and the message underneath the attack was clear to everyone at High Command the moment the reports came in. We will kill the ones you are protecting, world by world, until you break. Your civilians are your weakness. We have found it. Surrender or watch them die. I was in High Command when the reports came in from Sanctuary, and I will not describe them to you in detail, because some things should not be made into entertainment, and the deaths of children fleeing a war is one of them. I will only tell you that the room, a room full of hardened officers, people who had seen years of war, went silent, and then it filled with a kind of rage I have never felt before or since, a rage that had a temperature that you could feel coming off the walls, because the Dominion had done the one thing, the absolute one thing, that every human in that room had a personal and total and unanimous response to, which was, make them pay. Whatever it takes. Burn their worlds the way they burned ours. They crossed the line. There are no more lines now. I want to describe the rage honestly, because the history sand it down into something noble, and it was not noble. It was human, and the difference matters. It was not a cold, strategic anger. It was grief that had nowhere to go and so turned into the desire to make someone else feel it. Officers were weeping at their stations, hard people, senior people, openly, not bothering to hide it, and the weeping and the rage were the same thing, were a single unbearable pressure looking for release, and the release that offered itself, the only one that felt like it might equal the size of the grief, was to do it back, to find their sanctuary, to make the Dominion's children play in the dust and then take that from them too, so that they would know, so that the universe would be balanced, so that our dead would be answered. I felt it. I have to keep saying that because it would be easy to tell this story as if I stood apart and saw clearly. I didn't. I wanted them to burn. I stood there with my closed door blown open, and 2 years of names I'd stopped being able to read pouring through it. And I wanted the Dominion to suffer exactly what we were suffering, and I would have cheered the order. And the thing is, it would not even have been wrong exactly by the ordinary logic of war. That's what made it so dangerous. They had abandoned the rule first. Retaliation in kind is a thing every military doctrine in the galaxy permits. You observe the limits as long as the enemy does, and when they break them, you are released. We would have been within the brutal law of war to answer sanctuary with a sanctuary of our own. No tribunal would have convicted us. Half the galaxy would have understood. The rage in that room was not a lapse. It was the correct and lawful and human response, reaching for the correct and lawful and human weapon, and that is precisely why it took something more than ordinary correctness to stop it. And we could have. That was the terrible thing. We had been holding back. Every power in a war holds back, keeps its worst options in reserve, observes the limits because the other side observes them too. The Dominion had just announced that the limits were gone, that civilian worlds were now targets, and the rage in that room was not just grief. It was the sudden lifting of every restraint, the awful liberating clarity of they did it first, so now we can do anything. We had the fleets to reach the Dominion's own refugee worlds, their own civilian centers, the ones they'd assumed we'd never strike because we were the kind of people who didn't strike those. We could have answered sanctuary with 10 sanctuaries. The targets were already coming up on the displays. The authorization was already being drafted. The entire weight of Terran High Command in that moment was a single drawn breath away from doing to the Dominion exactly what the Dominion had done to us. And every person in that room wanted it, needed it, was reaching for it. And then the old admiral stood up. That's where I have to stop this first time. Because what the old admiral said, and the response that High Command actually chose, the response that was not vengeance, that refused the thing every grieving human in that room was reaching for, and that defeated the Sceptre Dominion more completely than any counter-atrocity ever could have. That's the whole of the story, and I need you standing exactly here first. In a room at Terran High Command, in the silent, furious moment after a refugee world was deliberately murdered, with the targets coming up on the displays and the authorization being drafted, and every human present a single breath away from becoming the thing they were fighting, and one old admiral rising to say the hardest word there is, which was no. The admiral's name was Akafer, and he was the oldest officer in the room, and the only one not weeping, and I learned later that was because he'd already done his weeping in a war before this one, a long time ago, over a thing he never spoke about. And I think that older grief was where his clarity came from, The way a person who has already survived the worst sees the present catastrophe through a longer lens than everyone still inside their first one. He stood, and the room did not quiet for him, not at first. People were past quieting, and he did not raise his voice. He waited, the way you wait out a storm, and slowly the room turned toward him, because there is something about one still person in a room full of breaking people that pulls the eye. And when he had enough of the room, he said the thing that started the argument that decided everything. He said, "Before anyone signs anything, I want to ask one question, and I want a real answer. Why did they do it?" And someone, a younger admiral, raw with grief, said what everyone felt. "Because they're animals, because they're monsters, does it matter why?" "It matters more than anything," HFY said. "Because they are not animals and they are not monsters, and if we tell ourselves they are, we will walk straight into the thing they built this for. Listen to me. The Dominion is not stupid. They have been fighting us for 2 years and studying us the whole time. They did not hit Sanctuary in a rage. They hit it as a calculation. So before we do exactly what our rage tells us to do, I want this room to consider the possibility that our rage is the weapon. That they hit Sanctuary precisely because they knew it would make us feel what we are all feeling right now, and do what we are all about to do, and that the doing of it is their actual objective. They didn't attack a refugee world to kill refugees. They attacked it to kill us, the us that the galaxy respects, the us that isn't them. They want us to answer Sanctuary with a sanctuary. That's the trap. That's the whole move." And the room pushed back hard, because grief does not want to be told it's being manipulated. But HFY kept going, and what he laid out over the next hour was the thing that I have come to believe was the truest reading of that war anyone ever made. "Think about what they actually gain," he said, "if we retaliate in kind. We're the smaller power. We've been holding this war for 2 years on one thing, and it isn't our fleet. Our fleet is smaller than theirs and always will be. It's legitimacy. We are winning the part of this war that matters most, which is the question of who the rest of the galaxy thinks is in the right, because we have fought clean and they have fought dirty, and every neutral power and every wavering ally has been slowly coming to our side because we are the people who don't bomb refugee worlds. That is our actual strength. That is the thing keeping us alive, that the galaxy is tilting toward us, that the Dominion is becoming the pariah, that powers who might have joined the Dominion are holding back because no one wants to be on the side of the empire that makes war on children. The moment we burn one of their refugee worlds, all of that is gone. In one stroke we become them. We become 2 empires bombing each other's civilians, morally identical, and the galaxy stops tilting toward us because there's no longer a side to tilt toward. They are not trying to kill our refugees. They are trying to make us forfeit the only advantage we have by trading it for the satisfaction of revenge. And we are about to hand it to them, gift-wrapped, because we're in too much pain to see the board." The room was silent now, a different silence than the rage, the silence of people being shown a thing they didn't want to see and couldn't unsee. "So no," HFY said, "we do not answer this with a sanctuary of our own. Not because I don't want to, I want to burn their worlds as much as any of you. My hands want to sign that order. I am not made of stone. I want to because I am human and they hurt my people, and the want is right. The want is good. It means we love our people. But the want is also exactly the lever they're pulling, and a commander who lets the enemy choose his response by manipulating his grief is not a commander. He's a tool. We will not be their tool. We will not become the thing we're fighting to make this war worth winning at all." And then the younger admiral, still raw, asked the question that turned it from a refusal into a strategy, the question that I think is the real hinge of the whole story. He said, "Then what? We just absorb it. We let them murder a refugee world and do nothing. That's not mercy, HFY, that's surrender. They'll do it again. They'll hit the next sanctuary and the next, and your beautiful legitimacy won't mean anything to the children in the ground." And that was the real question, And Akafar had an answer. And the answer is the thing that made humanity feared, the response the histories misremember. No, he said, we don't absorb it and we don't do nothing. We respond overwhelmingly with everything we have, more force than this command has ever committed to anything. But we aim all of it at the one thing they cannot defend against and cannot understand, which is saving people. Here is what we do. Every refugee world we have, every civilian center, every place they might hit next, we don't pull back from them. We don't hide them, we flood them. We move the fleet, the whole fleet, not to attack the Dominion but to shield our own helpless. We make every sanctuary in human space so completely defended that the Dominion cannot touch another one without throwing their navy against the immovable wall of ours. And we announce it openly to the whole galaxy that humanity's response to the murder of children is to put its entire military between the enemy and every child in its care, and to dare the Dominion to try again. We don't burn their refugees. We make it impossible for them to burn ours. And then we go further, we open our space. We announce that any civilian of any species, including Dominion civilians fleeing this war, may come to human-protected worlds and be sheltered, because humanity does not make war on the helpless. Anyone's helpless, and we will prove it by protecting even the children of the empire that just murdered ours. The room did not understand it at first. I watched it land slowly, the way the deepest things land. And then I watched person after person understand, and I understood it too, and it was the most devastating strategic idea I have ever heard, and it had nothing to do with weapons. Because do you see what it did? Akafar's response trapped the Dominion completely. They had spent a calculated atrocity to make humanity forfeit its legitimacy. And instead, humanity had taken that very atrocity and used it to make its legitimacy unanswerable. If the Dominion attacked another refugee world now, they would be throwing their navy against humanity's entire shielding fleet, in full view of a galaxy that had just watched humanity respond to mass murder by vowing to protect every child alive, including theirs. They could not retaliate against the response, because the response was mercy, and you cannot bomb mercy without revealing yourself to the entire watching galaxy, as exactly the monster humanity had refused to become. The Dominion had tried to drag humanity down to their level, and humanity had answered by climbing higher, in public, with its whole strength, and there was no move the Dominion could make against that which did not make them look worse and humanity look better. Akafar had taken the enemy's worst atrocity and turned it into the foundation of humanity's victory, not by matching it, but by refusing it so completely, so overwhelmingly, so strategically, that the refusal itself became the most powerful weapon in the war. That's where I have to stop this first time. Because what happened when humanity actually did it? When the fleet moved not to burn but to shield, when human space opened its doors even to the enemy's refugees, and when the Sceptre Dominion had to decide what to do against an enemy who had answered an atrocity with overwhelming mercy and left them no target that wouldn't damn them. That's the resolution, the whole of it, and I need you standing exactly here first. In a room at Terran High Command, the rage finally broken, watching an old admiral turn the worst day of the war into its turning point, by insisting that the only response worthy of the children of Sanctuary was to make sure no more children, on any side, ever joined them. We did it. That's the part that still amazes me looking back, not that Akafar thought of it, but that High Command actually did it, that a building full of people who an hour earlier had wanted to burn worlds chose instead the harder thing, and held to it. I think it was because Akafar gave the grief somewhere to go that wasn't revenge. He didn't ask the room to swallow its rage and do nothing. That would have failed. You cannot ask grieving people to do nothing. He gave them a way to spend the rage that was bigger than revenge, to channel all that terrible energy into protecting, into saving, into making sure the children of Sanctuary were the last children to die that way. And a room full of people who loved their people found that they could pour everything into that, all the fury and all the grief, and it held. So the fleet moved, not toward the Dominion, toward our own. It was the largest defensive redeployment in human history, and it happened in days, because grief is a powerful engine when you point it at the right thing. Every refugee world, every civilian center, every place behind our lines where the helpless had been gathered, we shielded them with everything. We pulled ships off the frontier, accepted risk on the military front that made the war college people blanch, and we put the Navy where the children were. We turned every sanctuary into a fortress, not so they could attack from it, but so that nothing could ever again reach the people inside. And we announced it, openly to the whole galaxy, on every channel, that the Sceptre Dominion had murdered a refugee world, and that humanity's response was to place its entire military between the enemy and every non-combatant in human space, and to invite the Dominion to test that wall whenever it liked. And then we opened the doors. That was the part that broke the war open, the part that no one in the Dominion saw coming, because it was not in their playbook or anyone's. Humanity announced that its protection extended to anyone, that any civilian of any species fleeing this war, including the civilians of the Sceptre Dominion itself, could come to human-protected space and be sheltered, fed, kept safe, no questions asked, because humanity did not make war on the helpless and would prove it did not by protecting even the helpless of its enemy. We opened our refugee worlds to the children of the empire that had just murdered ours. I want to tell you what that did, because it is the most extraordinary thing I have ever watched a strategy do, and it did it without firing a shot. The Dominion was trapped, exactly as HFY had said they would be, but seeing it happen was different from hearing it predicted. They had wanted to provoke us into an atrocity. We had given them, instead, the spectacle of an enemy responding to mass murder by vowing to protect every child in the galaxy, theirs included. And now the Dominion had to choose, in front of the entire watching galaxy, what to do about it, and every choice was a defeat. If they attacked another of our refugee worlds, they would be throwing their navy against humanity's entire shielding fleet. A real battle, a costly one, fought in full view of a galaxy that had just watched humanity offer to shelter Dominion children. They would be the Empire attacking the people who'd offered sanctuary to its own. Every neutral power, every wavering ally, would harden against them in an instant. If they did nothing, if they let humanity's wall stand and humanity's open doors stay open, then the message to their own people was catastrophic, because the offer was real and word of it spread, the way that kind of word spreads, through an empire grown tired of a long war. Humanity will shelter you. Humanity does not make war on the helpless. The empire that rules you just murdered a world of children, and the enemy responded by offering to protect yours. Which side, a frightened Dominion civilian began to wonder, is actually the monster here? The Dominion had spent 400 years being feared by its own people, and humanity had just, in a single move, become the thing the Dominion's own civilians looked toward when they were afraid. And there is no faster way to lose an empire than for your own people to start seeing your enemy as their protector. And Dominion civilians came. That was the thing that finished it. Not many at first, then more civilians from the Dominion's own frontier worlds, fleeing the war their empire had started, crossing to human-protected space because the humans had said they would be safe there, and impossibly the humans meant it. We took them in. We sheltered the children of the people who had killed the children of sanctuary, and we did it without bitterness in public, because HFY understood that the bitterness was the trap, and the mercy was the weapon. And every Dominion family that crossed over and was treated with decency was a wound in the Dominion's authority that no counter-atrocity could ever have inflicted. We were unmaking their empire from the inside, by being the thing they'd told their people we weren't. The war did not end in a battle. It ended the way HFY's whole strategy implied it would, in the slow collapse of the Dominion's legitimacy, its alliances dissolving, its neutrals turning against it, its own people losing faith in a leadership that had made war on children and been answered with mercy, until the Dominion could no longer sustain the war at all, not for lack of ships, but for lack of the one thing no fleet can supply, which is the belief of your own people that you are in the right. They sued for peace, in the end. And the peace humanity made was not vengeful. HFY saw to that too, was in the room for that too, an old man insisting to the last that you do not plant the next war in the soil of this one's ending. We did not crush them. We did not take their worlds or punish their people. We simply made them stop and live beside an enemy who had proven, beyond any argument, that it was the better of the two, which is a heavier sentence than any conqueror ever imposed, to have to live next to the people you tried to make monsters and who refused. HFY died a few years after the war. I was at the small service, he didn't want a large one. And someone there, another old officer, said the thing that I've kept, the truest epitaph for what he did. He said, "He's the man who won the war by refusing to win it the easy way. We'd all have burned them. He's the only one who saw that burning them was how we'd lose." People tell this story now as the day humanity's enemy crossed the final red line, and Terran High Command responded. And they tell it as the prelude to a great and terrible vengeance, the unleashing, the moment the gentle giant finally showed its teeth. And every time I hear it told that way, I have to stop them, because it is exactly backwards, and HFY would have hated it, and the children of Sanctuary deserve better than to be turned into the excuse for a war crime that never happened. The Empire crossed our final red line. They murdered the helpless to make us murder the helpless back. And Terran High Command responded overwhelmingly with everything we had, holding nothing in reserve. We responded by saving people, by putting our whole strength between the enemy and every child alive, including theirs, by refusing with all our power to become the thing that had hurt us. The red line was never "don't hurt us." We could survive being hurt. The red line was "don't make us into you." And when the Dominion tried to cross that one, to drag us down into their own darkness where they knew the terrain, humanity did the one thing they had no defense against. We stayed ourselves, out loud, in front of the whole galaxy, with the fleet at our back and our doors thrown open and our dead unanswered by any matching atrocity. That was the response, not the fire everyone remembers, the refusal of it. And it burned the Sceptre Dominion to the ground more surely than any weapon we owned. Because the most dangerous thing humanity ever did to an empire that bet everything on our becoming monsters was to look it in the eye, over the graves of our own children, and decline.